Hey everyone, welcome to the program, WRSA Radio. I'm your host, G1. As always, hope you're having a good week. As you maybe can tell, I'm dealing with some allergies. I don't know if you can pick it up in my voice, but it is the most wonderful time of the year in the South when we are subjected to vast dust clouds of pollen, these yellow plague that sweeps over us, just laying waste to everything that we plan to do outside for about a month or a month and a half or so in the spring, and then we usually get it again in the fall. But I've mentioned this before on the show, but there's a scale that measures pollen count, and anything over, like, I don't know, I think the scale only goes up to like 200, and anything over that is considered severe. Well, as a matter of routine in the South, we will hit anywhere from 3,000 to 6,000 on that scale, which in my mind says that the scale is completely out of calibration. It's rather useless. But I think this week we've been somewhere in the 3,000 range in my area, so I'm a bit stuffy and not getting much in the way of sleep. But my dear listeners, I struggle for my art, so I have put together a show for you today, in spite of my condition. Seriously, though, it's really more annoying than anything. So let's get on with the show. We are several weeks into the air campaign with Iran, and we have had some rather interesting developments this week, mostly around the statements of the president regarding negotiations with the Iranian government, the information that is being presented to the public, and what is really going on in the background. Those are kind of the developments there. So, and those things are seemingly at odds with one another at times. So what is really going on here? Let's get into the propaganda side of things first, from both sides of this conflict, because it's happening from everybody. The president, as you all know, is a showman. Some people call him a con man or a liar, whatever term you want to use, depends largely on how you feel about him personally or whatever, however you think about him. I call him a CEO because that is something I'm very much familiar with, having been in the corporate world for 30 plus years, meaning that there are times that he will tell you accurate information, and then there are times that he will tell you what he thinks you want to hear. And that means that you should pay less attention to what he is saying and more attention to what he is doing. And that extends to the entire administration, the people under him as well. I guess that's because that I was in that environment for so long that I've largely become, immune to that whole, the emotional damage that can do to people, that can inflict upon them. This, particularly people who expect level and honest dealings with people. Everybody that they meet, they just don't really like the idea, or don't really fathom the idea that somebody would willingly do that to them, and they always look at it as being nefarious or duplicitous, and sometimes it is. Most of the time it probably is, but there are sometimes that people tell you what you want to hear, because they're trying to be nice to you. But anyway, that's not really how the world works anymore, much to our detriment. So do not put much emphasis on what the president is saying in this situation. That's not very encouraging, but it's the best approach to take when you are reading or hearing the commentary that you're going to see come out of the media even, and the blogosphere. Because if you accept everything that you are seeing out there, every take that is presented, you are blissfully unaware of reality, regardless of what side that you're listening to. We have people so emotionally invested in their position that they're eating the most blatant propaganda and spitting it back out as if it were facts, and that it is completely damning to, the other side of the debate. And I'm talking about both or all aspects of this. Nobody seems to be really saying anything that is reality, and everybody's kind of rah-rahing for their position. None of it is reality. And I said this a few episodes back, that it's a very real flashback for me to the opening stages of the Ukrainian conflict, and how wildly out of sync with reality the messaging across the board was, regardless of which side of that discussion you were taking. Now, that all being said, I don't have super confidence that my position is any more accurate than anyone else's position, but what I'm trying to do is kind of strike a balance in my approach and assume that the truth is very likely somewhere in the middle of all this propaganda. I'm neither freaking out and professing that the house of cards is all collapsing for the U.S., everything that Iran says is the truth, and the U.S. has just met its match and is getting humiliated. But nor am I taking the position that the U.S. is totally wiping the floor with Iran, and, we've got them broken, and that this thing's all just over. It's just a matter of the crying at this point. And that's because this air campaign is not a win or lose scenario. I laid that out last week, that I believed that for Israel, this campaign is being ran in order to weaken Iran's ability to support Hezbollah, which enables them to seize land in what is now southern Lebanon. And this week we're seeing that plan being materialized. This is exactly what Israel is doing. They're currently undertaking this military operation, this ground operation. It's proceeding a bit slower than they probably would have hoped, but it is proceeding. And what the administration has publicly said, and what I believe has been confirmed by these actions, is that Israel has its agenda and the U.S. has its agenda, and those two positions are not exactly the same. And I think that means that Trump and his people saw this attack as a means to achieve something that Israel might not in fact be happy with. But let's go back into history and kind of draw some comparisons to kind of help flesh out this case, if you will. Richard Nixon is president. The U.S. is drawing down its troop deployments in Vietnam and turning prosecution of the war over to the South Vietnamese. It's 1972, and the North Vietnamese launch an invasion of South Vietnam. So in order to assist South Vietnam and to reduce the ability of the North to logistically supply this operation, President Nixon authorizes the commencement of Operation Linebacker. Later became known as Linebacker 1 because there was a Linebacker 2, but we'll get to that. This was a massive air campaign aimed primarily at the transportation infrastructure of North Vietnam. And this included, isolation of the country from the sea by mining the harbors, using airdropped mines. It was attacks on bridges and rail networks and all these kind of things. The campaign ran for a number of months, May to October, and during this operation, the U.S. lost over 130 aircraft, mostly from ground-based air defense or mechanical issues, but there was something like 27 air-to-air kills by North Vietnamese Air Force. In return, the U.S. destroys 64 North Vietnamese Air Force aircraft in air-to-air combat. So we lost twice the number of aircraft overall than the NVA did. So, wow, we got defeated, right? I mean, they killed twice as many of our aircraft as we did of theirs. So, killing some of the crew and taking some of them prisoner, right? I mean, that's how we judge these things today, apparently. But that's not how it was judged in 1972. Linebacker is viewed as a very successful operation. It stalled the North's offensive, and it brought them back to a more serious peace negotiations. While all this had been taking place, the North Vietnamese had stepped away from the peace tables. They were not seriously having conversations. And that was one of the other aspects of this campaign was, I'm going to bomb them and make it very, very tough for them. I'm going to hit targets that previously in the Johnson administration had been off limits. We were not attacking the harbors. We were not attacking the rail lines and the marshaling yards and all these kind of things. He does that. He authorizes that and brings them back to the table. Now, ultimately, it did not produce the desired peace accord that Nixon was after, but it certainly made the North more open to talks. They came to the table. They had discussions. Operation Linebacker 2 did produce a peace deal. That again is viewed as a successful campaign, even though the peace deal would later collapse as the North launched yet another invasion of the South, which would ultimately be successful. The point of me bringing this up is twofold. One, to provide some context for air operations and what they can realistically be expected to achieve, and how we measure and grade those operations. They do not take and hold territory. Okay, that's not what they do. They're not capable of that. They do not replace on their own political regimes. Even if you bomb some command and control structures and political leadership, it's not, unless you just happen to get them all. And so under a very, very limited scope, it might maybe achieve some type of leadership change, but ultimately not. It's not going to break an entire government like that. They're generally done to create favorable situations for future efforts, be those political or laying the groundwork for further military operations. So they're really more of a shaping operation, even when they are conducted as a punitive measure. You did this like we've done in the past. We don't like what you've done, so we're going to shoot some missiles at some of your military targets and cost you a lot of money. They're done to produce some effects, but they're not an end of themselves. They're a means to an end. The second point of bringing this up is that these operations were conducted by the Nixon administration. Many people do not really seem to be aware of how close Donald Trump was to Richard Nixon. They considered each other to be pretty close friends, and in fact, it's Richard Nixon who planted the seeds for Donald Trump to be a serious political candidate, for him to really consider that as a possible future for himself. He told Trump back in the 80s that in a letter to him, he wrote him a letter, and he told him that he would be a winner when he decided to run for office. And I believe that Donald Trump is trying to run Operation Linebacker 3 here, basically, although in a much smaller, condensed form. I really do think he's trying to push Iran back to the table to be more serious in their negotiations. And I think this is where he's drawing this inspiration from. And I think he believes in some measure that it will be somewhat of an end run around Israel. Now let's qualify that for a second, because we don't really know what the demands were that were presented to Iran prior to this attack. We don't know how serious they really were about those demands. So when I say that we're bombing them back to the table or trying to get them back to the table, that's from the perception of the administration. They thought they were not getting what they wanted to get, so they undertook this part of the operation, or this air campaign. Whether that's realistic, maybe they gave them something that was really unrealistic, and Iran was never going to concede to it. But regardless, this is how they perceive things. And we're also seeing all of this through a filter of the Israeli narrative, as well as a filter of Iranian propaganda. They're saying, no, 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 that's not what happened, or, the U.S. negotiated not in good faith. They were planning on bombing us the whole time. All of that is through these filters. And yes, I know it is surprising to some of the people out there, but Iran indeed is lying to you and not giving you anything remotely accurate when they report their side of the information. I follow the Telegram channels, a lot of these international Telegram channels, the Russian ones or the Slavic ones in particular. A lot of these people out there, there's a whole lot of stuff that gets tossed around as factual by the hard right that they're getting from these channels that just does not even get a single grain of salt cast in its direction. I'm kind of shocked by the number of people that I consider to be rational and pretty level-headed that have just gone completely off the rails hysterical about everything that Iran is saying. Look, Iran says they did this, and Iran says they did that. Well, who cares what Iran says? Is some of that probably accurate? Sure. There's a measure of truth in what they're saying. It's not all accurate. A lot of it's bullshit. Why are you eating that? Because you disagree with this? They've just abandoned all measure of objectivity because they don't like that we've undertaken this attack. Well, I don't like it either. I disagree with it. I don't think that it was in our best interest to do this. We had no real time pressure to steer away from this diplomatic table. There was nothing that said really that we couldn't continue talks for a month or 2 months. What was the pressure there? But we began this bombing campaign. For what reason? Well, we've discussed why that happened, so we don't need to go down that track again. But I believe, however, that Trump is not the completely willing slave to Israel that many think he is, mostly because I believe he's just not willing to admit that he's not the one making decisions. It's his narcissism more than anything, but he is by some means pushed into a line of action, as we've discussed. I don't think he's 100% on board with that line of action, so I think he's trying to find a way to appear to be compliant with Israel, and what Israel wants and what Israel's demanding, but to get his goals accomplished as well. I really truly believe that he wants to be remembered as a man who brought long-term peace to the Middle East. Even if that's not really an achievable goal, I think he wants to do it. I think he's really serious about that. Maybe just out of pure arrogance, but regardless, I think that's what he wants. I can't speak to his real true motivations, but this is what I think he's actually trying to do. But he is forced, as I said, by whatever means that is there, to make these concessions to Israel, and those concessions are outweighing the obvious downstream ramifications of this energy supply situation, the closing of the straits, the public opinion backlash, the political capital that he's blown out of the water. Because of all that, he's just got a very short time frame to make all of these things happen in. I don't think that we really truly can get ourselves involved in some kind of long actual ground war, and that's just not on the table. I do believe that there are talks ongoing again with Iran, but Iranian leadership cannot publicly appear to be having these talks because they have to save face with their hardliners. Whatever political leadership that we're discussing things with cannot appear to be conceding anything to the Americans for the Revolutionary Guard or whoever the hardliners are over there. So they're not free to say whatever they want. They have to say whatever they want. They have to say, no, we're fighting the Americans, and we're standing up to them, and we're not having these talks. Behind the scenes, though, it's another story. And this leaves me with the potential for ground troops, as I said. And in short, because this video is kind of getting long, I don't see that happening. I think it's entirely posturing in the face of Iran. It's saying, look, we're not taking any options off the table here. We might do something with these people that we're bringing over there. But I really think that those troops are not destined for Iran. I think that those troops are probably going to Lebanon. I think they're going to be in place to assist Israel completing that takeover of that territory. Or they could be sent to Gaza. I believe that you're going to see one more major phase of air sorties probably tomorrow afternoon. And then Trump is going to pull back and stop the attacks, and we'll probably have peace talks, negotiations, in a public place like Pakistan. That's something that is already being talked about and put out there. It would not shock me to see the president go to Pakistan himself and conclude these talks with the leadership of Iran. And then our troops that are in the area will be sent, as I said, to Israel. It wouldn't shock me to see them occupying Gaza, which frees up troops for the Israelis, for their operation in Lebanon. And it's also an aspect of these negotiations that Iran can say, look, we negotiated getting the Israelis out of Gaza. The Americans have come in. They may eventually put in, as the precursor for UN peacekeepers or something like that in Gaza. So it gives them a face-saving measure for this whole thing. And I could be wrong about some of those details, but I think that that's the general path that we're going to see things. I hope that it is, because I don't think that the other path is, well, one, it's not viable, and I don't think that it's really what the administration wants. Certainly what the Israelis want, but I don't think it's really what the administration wants. But we shall see. Anyway, that is all I have time for this week. Like and subscribe. Come see us over on Gab, Nice Crew Digital, and the Mothership. Visit the merch store for a t-shirt, and I will see you on the next episode.